everyone. I'm Matt, and welcome to the Good Trouble Show. In 2022, the CBS News program 60 Minutes reported on a mysterious illness afflicting members of the national security community, including White House staff, FBI agents, CIA and military officers, and their families. Last month, 60 Minutes aired a follow-up story on this secret weapon causing these injuries and who was possibly behind the attacks. Today, we have a pre-recorded interview with the attorney featured in the 60 Minutes story with new information and a little-known memo from the National Security Agency that is quite possibly the smoking gun. But first, please hit the subscribe and thumbs up buttons on YouTube. Leave a comment and let us know what you think about this episode. You can also find us on Twitter at Good Trouble Show and all other social media platforms at The Good Trouble Show. And of course, we are on all of your favorite podcasting platforms. Just search for The Good Trouble Show with Matt Ford. We also need your help keeping the lights on. You can become a supporter of The Good Trouble Show by going to www.patreon.com/The Good Trouble Show. And for the price of a coffee, you can support our work. Finally, Super Chats are open on YouTube and are another great way to support this show. I want to thank our Patreon and YouTube supporters, members, our chat moderators who volunteered their time, and all of you who are watching. Thank you, as always, for the generosity of your time. So, our guest today is a Washington, D.C.-based attorney who represents former and current federal employees, including intelligence and military officers, defense contractors, and whistleblowers. Featured in Forbes magazine's top 200 lawyers in the United States, this attorney, armed with a security clearance, is fighting for multiple clients from the national security establishment who are victims of Havana Syndrome, otherwise known as Anomalous Health Injuries. Our interview with attorney Mark Zaid. Mark, thank you for joining us. What is Havana Syndrome and how do the victims describe the attack?
Sure, Matthew, thanks so much for having me on. So, for one thing, we should start out. I hate the term Havana Syndrome, which is the term obviously the media uses and the public uses because that's the term that is so easily descriptive of what this is. And of course, it originates from the fact that there were a series of incidents/attacks in Havana, Cuba in 2016 that came to light and gave it the name. It's sort of similar to the notion of the Spanish flu, which, of course, was the big pandemic from the World War I era, which was unfairly blamed on Spain in the sense of Spanish flu when it actually originated in Kansas, the United States. But I get it. Havana Syndrome is the term that's used because it's hard to describe otherwise. We use the term now, anomalous health incidents. So what does that mean? It means something different to many of the people, although there are commonalities or similarities. It has typically been described as a sudden onset of severe pain, pulsations into the head. Think the worst migraine you've ever had times 100, sometimes, but not always, accompanied by sound. But understand the sound is not one that anyone hears. It's only in the person's, I'll say, mind, in the sense of, I have tinnitus or tinnitus. Many people do, right? If I clench down on my teeth, it gets louder. Nobody else hears it because it's only in my head. It's something with the inner ear and communications to the brain. It's something like that. I'm not a scientist, just a lawyer. Just play one on television.
I play television host. Yeah, I understand.
Yeah,
and
so
I have tinnitus as well. Sorry.
Yeah. So this sound, and it's, all right, you know how annoying it is. I mean, I got it 24/7, and especially when it's quiet. That's why I'm always actually listening to music in the background when I'm working, because otherwise I hear the damn sound. So they hear a loud sound that has been described, as crickets. And unfortunately, one of my clients recorded on their cell phone the sound of what, like, hey, this is what it sounds like. And it turned out he was actually recording crickets because that was an actual sound that they were hearing. And it's somewhat helpful because if you listen to the recording, you can go online and listen to it. It actually does hurt your ears. So it was just a descriptive sense. So what else? Severe fatigue. Look, a lot of these people are being diagnosed by military physicians as having traumatic brain injuries, TBIs, just like as if they were in an improvised explosive device incident, an IED on the battlefield in whichever country. There could be issues with the vision where they lose their vision or they have trouble with their vision. They can't see long time on a computer screen. There could be balance issues, vertigo issues. Some people have all of these memory issues. Some people have all, some people just have some of these. Some of it's severe and sort of incapacitating. Others can overcome it and still move forward. So those are very sort of generalized. And the problem with it actually being so general at times is that there are a lot of ailments that people could have that mirror that seem to be that. Just in the same way when 15 years ago it was a big thing to have Lyme disease. I thought I had Lyme disease. According to the internet, I had Lyme disease. I didn't have Lyme disease. I don't know what the hell I had, but the symptoms just mirrored it. But there are, let's be key with the people I represent, there are diagnoses, I can never say that word, a diagnosis by military physicians most of the time, but also civilian expert doctors of either traumatic brain injuries or other types of injuries known to be accompanied by AHIs.
Now, how long has this been going on and how many people have been hit in total, not including the cases that you represent?
So also another complicated question to put in context, depending on what do we mean with this going on, right? My view, historically, this dates back to the 1960s.
Wow, that far back.
In a different form. Like, I lecture separately on the history of comic books. Right? We were talking as we were going to air on this about San Diego Comic-Con, where I lecture most years at this convention. When I talk about the history of comic books, I talk about how cave paintings are an ancestor of the evolution to comic books. They have changed very much over the years. If you looked at comic books from what I say is a comic book from the 19th century, you would not recognize it as a comic book today. It's an ancestral evolution. Same thing with AHIs. So we know for a fact, people can Google it and go find the unclassified, declassified documents on the Moscow signal. The notion that the Soviet Union in the 60s and 70s and probably into the 80s, were bombarding the U.S. Embassy in Moscow with low-level microwaves for years. And it was never really understood why they were doing it. It appears it was being done for technological purposes because it would trigger an eavesdropping device or devices that had been planted secretly into the embassy.
And paintings, if I remember right?
There was a seal of the U.S. Eagle that the Soviets gave to our ambassador as a gift, a beautiful, big wooden seal. Of course, we scan it, we inspect it, nothing gets triggered, right? You know, sort of think of like a Geiger detector device. Sure. Nothing's going off as we're checking around for a bug, a microphone, because what they had implanted in there was, again, not being a scientist or a technological person, engineer, it didn't have any parts that were active. Like there's no active battery. The Soviets figured out how to use microwaves to trigger, or energy to trigger the device to vibrate in some way or something like that, so that sound would convey through it and they could listen in for 7 years on our ambassador's conversations. So my view is this technology has evolved over time, as technologies do, so that at some point in time, it has been weaponized. Now, the weaponization depends on the intent of the user, and we don't know that at this point, right? I don't know, and I still suspect that whatever these devices are still have an eavesdropping, surveillance, data extraction function. They're attacking the cell phones that people have on them. They're attacking the computers near the person, and the person is just collateral damage, essentially. They're not the target, but the Russians, in this case, or the adversary, doesn't care about it. But since 2016 in particular, because it has become so public and it is so well known that individuals are being harmed by this energy, it is clearly weaponized in that sense because the adversary knows openly that it's harming people. And we do suspect that that has actually been part of the motive for the adversary. Not, and I guess I'll caveat that, not necessarily to harm, to hurt, but to incapacitate. What's the best way to take someone off the battlefield? You don't have to kill them, you incapacitate them. That's just, especially from a spy versus spy,
right?
That's a perfect way to do it. I'll finish with just saying this isn't new. Henry Kissinger went to his Soviet counterpart in the mid-70s. This is documented because Kissinger documented it inside the Nixon administration. Might have even been in Ford by that time. I have to check the date again. And told his counterpart that the U.S. blamed or suspected that our ambassador had died because of the low-level microwaves that had been beamed at the embassy.
Wow. Wow. Okay, so let's talk about some of your clients in a general sense. What areas of the government do they come from that have been hit with anomalous health injuries?
So my first client was an NSA employee, and he was hit in the 1990s, about 1995 or 6, in still classified location. I was working on this case before Havana occurred in 2016. I was already on the case for about 3 years. And we didn't know of any wide cases. We knew of 2. My guy and his colleague who went to this classified location, which I've never been told internally at NSA what this is. One media report I know of identified it as Moscow. Don't know that if it's true or not, but that's what one media source reported it as. They said they had a source. So post Havana, I then was retained by State Department personnel, real diplomats who were based in Havana. And following that, I've got clients from the Defense Intelligence Agency, from the Central Intelligence Agency, from the Federal Bureau of Investigation, from USAID, the U.S. Agency for International Development, Aid and Development, from, I know I'm missing someone, from the Commerce Department, because there were foreign commercial service officers who are diplomats who go to promote trade in other countries. The commonality for almost all of them, and most of the victims I'm aware of, because I certainly know of many others, I just don't represent them, has been Russia. Some sort of Russian work that they were engaged in to counter Russian counterintelligence, counterespionage, nuclear proliferation, whatever it might have been. It's not every case. Some cases we think were mistaken identities. Just they got caught in the crossfire, or they thought there was someone from CIA who lived in a particular residence, but they had moved out and someone else had moved in. Some of them, I'll say, I can't tell you if they're real AHI victims or not. I can only tell you that they have suffered the symptoms and that they have been so designated by the U.S. government as potentially having suffered from AHI so that they're being treated on the U.S. government dime at U.S. government facilities.
Now, I understand that a lot of these victims included are not only the people that are employed by the government, but families and children of these families. Tell us about one case you found perhaps the most tragic, the most impactful.
Yes. So most of these incidents have occurred in the individual's homes. It is in whichever country, whether it's the United States or overseas, some of the incidents have absolutely happened at their workplace, but most of them have been in their residences, whether it's single family homes or condos, hotel rooms for some as well. And of course, that means that very often there are family members who are present, as well as pets. Now, understand, most of these locations, in fact, almost all of the locations that I'm aware of, are unlike war zones where clearly our diplomats, our spies, our military members are not bringing their family members to. These are awesome postings as a foreign service case officer. I want to go to Vienna, Austria. I want to go to Frankfurt, Germany. I'm going to bring my family with me. So this is a family environment. So there have been times where just the family member was impacted and not the actual federal employee. And there have been a number of cases where children, minors, some teenagers, but even infants under 12 years old have been impacted. I have one client I think the child was about 5 or 6 at the time, and they went from just an incredibly healthy, normal child that you would expect to someone who has trouble literally just walking in a straight line without falling over. And so this notion, for example, of where the naysayers will say it's psychosomatic, everybody, they're all talking at work and they're like, oh, I've suffered. Oh, my stomach hurts too. Yeah, the children don't encounter that, or how about the pets? Because there have been pets that have been impacted, dogs that have developed tumors. There have been dogs that all of a sudden the behavior is inconsistent with normal behavior. Now, we can all experience things like that with our pets. It doesn't necessarily mean, oh, wow, my cat is acting strange right now. She just peed on the floor. Right. Well, that's because this cat that I have is actually 22 years old. I expect that. But if I've got a healthy 1.5-year-old dog that is one of those, think of a dog that just never wants to be anywhere outside of your space, always with you by your side. And then all of a sudden, while you, the individual person, are experiencing an AHI, you notice that the dog has run and hid in a closet. That's a little peculiar.
Absolutely, and just how absolutely tragic that that there's been extensive collateral damage, like you mentioned, children and spouses that were not necessarily the target, and we'll get into this a little bit later, but it is just an insane leap of reasoning from the debunkers that say that this is all some psychogenic mental illness. I absolutely do not understand that reason. Now, one physician that we spoke with who studied these cases indicated that the brain lesions shown in the MRIs were kind of the same type seen in muscular dystrophy patients. The difference with AHI was that the doctor noted that unlike MS, where the brain lesions appear over a period of time, sort of gradually, with the AHI cases, the lesions appeared all at once. This is sort of like an acute onset versus, let's say, like, a chronic disease or some kind of sort of pre-existing condition. Does that match with your experience or with your clients?
Without a doubt, yes, that would certainly be applicable to quite a number of them. And there are problems from a medical standpoint of identifying markers for AHI, right? There is no like, oh, I go take a blood test and, oh, I can see you're iron deficient or whatever. That's an obvious thing. Or you don't have enough, whatever it might be, or your cholesterol's too high.
Right.
This, for the one thing, whatever, like the energy dissipates, right? It's not, if the beam, whatever the heck this is, if it's off, it's off. And unless you are testing it right away, including with the blood, including with some of the brain scans, you don't see it. So there are cases where the individual went for treatment or scanning right away, and these scans have been disseminated internally within the government. I mean, I know of people who have gone to meetings and been shown, hey, this is an AHI victim. Look at their brain scan. Oh my God! The non-doctors, the non-medical people are very cognizant of, I can absolutely see there's something wrong with this brain versus the normal brain. But a lot of times, and we saw this in the recent NIH study, that as time goes by, not everything remains that you can see a difference in all of the brain scans. But that is known, same thing with the blood, but that is known to be a factor with these types of injuries. So the absence is not necessarily evidence of no injury. And this is one of the problems and complaints that we've had for federal employees of why isn't there any baseline testing done before someone is sent overseas, or even just enters the workforce for the federal government, especially because we have domestic incidents, domestic attacks. Why isn't there blood drawn before you go over? Why isn't there a CAT scan or a CT or some sort of MRI? And obviously expense is one of those answers as to why. But clearly it's something that is needed to be done now, particularly in order to help cover medical care and costs going forward.
Olivia Troye, who was Mike Pence's Homeland Security advisor, was one of many officials in the Trump administration who was hit with AHI, and she went public with her story on 60 Minutes. She was hit with this event while walking from the Eisenhower building to the White House, and subsequently 2 other times inside the White House's secure grounds. Should Americans be concerned that the president and our national security apparatus could be targeted with this at any time?
There's no doubt there has to be, and there is that concern. So a few things about Olivia's situation and others like it. For one thing, there have been a number of domestic attacks here in the United States. Northern Virginia, Washington, D.C., Florida, and other locations of clients of mine and non-clients who I know of who are federal government, and some of the more actually credible incidents have been domestic attacks. I mean, there have been incidents at classified CIA facilities where I can't identify where they are, but I know enough about the descriptions from those who were present that in an unclassified way, that in the midst of their incident attack, their computer screen is going totally freaky. I mean, not in a ways that, what's going on with my computer? It's frozen. No. Like waves hitting it and the screen going haywire, right? Another thing about Olivia's situation is she was at the time a member of the Trump administration.
Right.
There are some who are trying to make this AHI situation partisan, political, Republican, Democrat. It is not. It has nothing to do with politics whatsoever. This has been an issue, like I said, for decades. And I started this case in the Obama administration. They date back in at least by way of what I believe to be a clear-cut attack to the Clinton administration and then the Nixon administration for the Moscow signal. So we have a number of people who are victims who happen to be outspoken against Donald Trump. Let's be clear, because anyone who researches some of these people will see that. But we have never, ever made any allegations against Donald Trump or the Trump administration as if they did something different or wrong versus any other administration. This is predominantly a CIA cover-up, and I know we will talk about that. That has nothing to do with who is in the White House. And so when Olivia was hit, she was a dedicated, loyal member of the Trump administration. She was targeted, presumably based on either because whoever it was just hitting someone coming out of the old executive office building to go to the White House, or maybe they did know who she was and things she was working on. I obviously don't know for that. But we should all be concerned that this technology allows for anyone to be hit and to be hit from a distance. And that technology exists. Now, depending on the technology will depend on the amount of energy, the size of the device, things like that. In fact, it's even in use now with the Israelis have used it on Palestinian crowds from an acoustic standpoint. Very large device, like it's on a truck, but enough to show that this acoustic, and that's not a weapon, that's a disruption device. We have it in the United States for crowd control. And we don't generally use it, but it exists. It was talked about actually during the Trump administration to use at crowds in and around the White House to suppress dissent. And it just, kind of makes people drop to the ground and incapacitates them with no known long-term impact. But let me tell you one thing. Let me read to you just one thing really quickly, because this is so key. Because I was given in October of 2014, as part of my representation of Michael Beck, who was my first original NSA client. This is before Havana, before we knew anything about Havana Syndrome. And the NSA gave me an unclassified memo in order to help me obtain workman's compensation for Michael Beck. It's a very short memo. It's like 4 sentences. The National Security Agency confirms that there is intelligence information from 2012 associating the hostile country to which Mr. Beck traveled in the late 1990s with a high-powered microwave system weapon that may have the ability to weaken, intimidate, or kill an enemy over time and without leaving evidence. The 2012 intelligence information indicated that this weapon is designed to bathe a target's living quarters in microwaves, causing numerous physical effects, including a damaged nervous system. The National Security Agency has no evidence that such a weapon, if it existed, and if it was associated with the hostile country in the late 1990s, was or was not used against Mr. Beck. Now, that's a statement written by lawyers, I can tell you, because that's who I was dealing with. But
still, yeah, it's significant.
Still, that statement is stunning pre-Havana, that they were telling me that existed. And that's what they were willing to acknowledge they believed existed.
Now, Olivia is a friend of mine. I've known her for quite some time. And when I was in Washington, D.C. last spring, I was actually staying with a friend of mine that's a U.S. Secret Service agent and was describing the case to this individual. Now, when I explained the thing, I could tell he was truly puzzled. And obviously, he's not going to reveal any sort of classified information. I would never want to be the recipient of any classified information. But kind of the impression that I got from him was he did not understand how a microwave signal, if that's indeed what it is, would not be picked up as with any sort of electronics or signatures intelligent. Have you ever spoken to the Secret Service about this? And do they seem to have any sort of countermeasures, or why do you think perhaps there's some puzzlement on their end as to how this could occur to people like Olivia on the White House grounds?
So I should first say, from a disclosure standpoint, Olivia is also a friend of mine. She's also a client of mine, not for AHI, actually. I didn't even know about her AHI attack until the 60 Minutes episode actually aired. Now, I have not spoken to the Secret Service. I represent Secret Service personnel all the time. I have not spoken to them about AHI. What I do know about this, in answer to your question, is that there are U.S. government officials, senior government officials, who in their entourage have individuals who handle possess detection devices for radiation, including microwaves, to determine if there is something that is going on in a particular location. There are also, and people can just Google this and find it in numerous places, the US government regularly solicits contracts and I'll say ideas, but contracting companies to build detection devices, to build offensive microwave weapons, to build defensive microwave shields. And there has also been any number of patents for companies and individuals that they have patented these types of devices, whether, again, detection, offensive, or defensive. The technology is out there for everyone to see. Sure, and I saw one naysayer's article just today, the stuff of science fiction. Yeah, it is sure. That's where a lot of great ideas come from. Right. I'm a huge Star Trek fan. Go ahead. I use Star Trek sites in my work all the time, because if you watch the original series in particular from 1966 to 69, so much of what they did by way of science fiction in Hollywood is real today. Yeah. I mean, what do you think a cell phone is? It's a communicator from Star Trek, or the self-typing typewriters, with voice recognition software. That wasn't a Star Trek episode. So I never understood this notion of, hey, let's go back. Jules Verne men on Mars, or certainly going to the moon. I'm pretty sure we've gone to the moon. Maybe some of the people out there don't think we have. I'm pretty confident Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin walked on the moon
in
1969. But science fiction is what gives us a lot of our ideas, and then they transform that into reality by way of technology.
Let's turn back to the possible source. So last month you appeared in a new 60-minute story on AHI that pointed to Russia being responsible for the attacks known as Havana Syndrome. Do you still agree with the assessment that it is likely from Russia? And let's say that we do have solid evidence that this is indeed Russia. Would that be considered an act of war?
So I do agree with the assessment for many of the cases. There's no way to say whether all of the cases were Russia or not. This technology exists and has existed for many years. We invented it, quite frankly, in the United States, and it's been developed by numerous other countries. And no doubt Russia has given it to its proxies. I mean, some of these attacks could very well have been committed by proxies and not by the Russians directly. Although as we showed in the 60 Minutes episode, one of the attacks in Frankfurt, they intercepted phone calls of individuals speaking in Russian about, should we leave the device on? I'm sure there are people in Germany who speak Russian, but how many of them happen to be right around where an AHI is taking place, right at that same time? Now, one of the concerns, and this is why I do think one of many reasons there is a U.S. government cover-up, and we can talk a little bit about that further, is the notion that what do these attacks represent? If we are correct that this is an adversary, whether it's data extraction or deliberately attempting to incapacitate a human asset, spy, diplomat, military, whatever, without a doubt, that could be construed as an act of war. We have cases here on U.S. soil that we believe were committed by a foreign adversary. You can't get more act of war than that beyond dropping a bomb, on Pearl Harbor or blowing up the World Trade Center. The question then is, what response should we be engaged with as a result? And that's where the conundrum certainly comes in, understandably, as to maybe why the U.S. government is not revealing, yes, we have evidence that Russia, Iran, China, whomever was responsible, but we're not doing anything.
Sometimes I wonder if the possibility exists that, because we all know every country does dirty things, including the United States. And sometimes I wonder if perhaps we have engaged in similar sort of asymmetric warfare. And if we were to, let's say, publicly call out Russia, then they could say, well, you know what? Your assets have been doing the same thing. I have no idea if that's true, but it was just something that came to mind. Now, in the 60 Minutes story,
I will say before you do
please.
That has been my thought for years, and
Really?
I have publicly said the same thing. I will tell you of the many reasons I have as to why I believe there's a U.S. government cover-up. That is the only one I admittedly will say I have no evidence of. I have asked people on the inside in the intelligence community, have we been engaged in doing something like that?
Sure.
And either I've been told no, or I don't think so, or I don't know that we have been. But it strikes me as plausible that, again, if it's for purposes of data extraction or incapacitation, non-harmful, one would think we've been doing the same.
Now, originally, the government said the victims were suffering from mass hysteria or a psychosomatic illness. Last year, the Office of the Director for National Intelligence, ODNI, issued a report stating that, quote, last year, it's very unlikely a foreign adversary is responsible and that the cases were due to pre-existing conditions, conventional illnesses, and environmental factors. Going into this whole cover-up thing, can you think of other reasons other than what we just spoke about a second ago as to why the CIA would want to cover this up and why?
Sure. Let me first say that type of downplay and even denigration is something I have seen in the 30 years I've been in D.C. in cases I've handled predominantly within the intelligence community, the military and law enforcement communities, as a typical tactic. I dealt with this in Gulf War syndrome in the early and mid 90s, where the government was denying that any of these folks who served in Iraq in the first Gulf War were suffering from anything. They said it was psychosomatic until we showed and they accepted that, no, it actually was something, whether the actual source is still a matter of dispute, but, burn pits, chemical weapons that were blown up at Qamishiyah in Iraq by military forces that dispersed the chemicals that were inside, things like that. I dealt with it on the anthrax vaccine, where I remember one general just making fun of all of these health effects, ill health effects. I was like, oh, yeah, these people think their penises are going to fall off. I mean, a general actually said that, and we proved that the vaccine was harmful to many people and wasn't properly licensed and deemed experimental. So in this particular situation, there are a number of reasons why I believe the government is covering up. And I will say, I have worked conspiracy theories for decades. I am not a conspiracist. I hate conspiracy theories.
Same.
I generally serve to debunk conspiracy theories. So when I say that the government is covering something up, I do not say that lightly at all. And I will say emphatically on this particular issue, the government is lying. The DNI, the CIA is lying. Now, I say that not because I'm just interpreting the same information that everybody else is. I'm saying that because I've reviewed classified information. I've sat in on many classified briefings. I talked to my CIA, DIA, NSA, intelligence community, law enforcement clients about this. Will I reveal the classified information? Absolutely not. I have a security clearance. I will protect that information. But I can tell you without revealing anything illegally that the information I have seen on the inside contradicts 180 degrees what the government is saying publicly. And don't believe me, I'll point you guys to the evidence. Let the government declassify it and explain what that information might be. That DNI report, and the CIA obviously says the same, there's a couple of things to it that were missed, quite frankly, because they have a way of wording certain things. So they talk about how it's highly unlikely, and they talk about the level of confidence that the agencies have, right? The intelligence community is made of 17 agencies. And in fact, some of those agencies have low-level confidence in the conclusion that a highly unlikely foreign adversary. That means basically they don't believe the statement that it's highly unlikely a foreign adversary was involved. They don't explain that in their report. They also said that while there were the majority of the cases they felt could be explained by other reasons, for one thing, that doesn't mean that they're not AHI. They just mean there could be something else. So, for example, I know of people where, like I played football in high school and college. I probably have had a concussion right back at that time. That's a pre-existing brain injury. So they would point to that. Oh, you had a concussion when you were, 20 years old, 30 years ago. So that maybe explains what this is. But importantly, what the media missed when those reports came out is the government even admitted that about 24 cases, they could not identify any alternative environmental factor or pre-existing medical condition to explain the person's circumstance. That should have been the screaming headline of those reports. 24 American officials seemingly were attacked by something, and we don't know what it is. But that was unfortunately ignored.
Do you think on this show we cover the UAP topic? One of the things that we have noticed with that particular issue is that there appears to be a coordinated effort on the DoD's part to influence the press such that they are pushing Pentagon talking points. Do you see that at all with the AHI issue?
I think as a general rule, yes. So I've worked. I mean, like most people, I've been fascinated by UAPs my entire life. How can you not grow up as a kid, right? Watching science fiction movies and aliens from outer space, etc. And I've worked on FOIA cases back in the 90s about UFOs at the time, right? And I do see. I think, like as a general rule, I find it very easy oftentimes in my work, because again, so much of my work is classified, that I'll say, sort of run circles around DoD public affairs, or I'll say government public affairs, because they're so constrained in what they can say, and they're so kind of with blinders on, that it's easier to dominate the topic. But they push things out in a way to ridicule people. So, like, how do you do that? And it's similar, UAPs versus AHI. It's psychosomatic. Oh, that person was mentally ill. Or you take the weakest link to expose as a wrong situation to say, see, that explains all the others. There were a number of reported AHI cases that I believe came out of Syria, of U.S. military, as I recall, and it turned out to be food poisoning. Now, if you think about food poisoning, there are similarities in the symptoms, but obviously you can figure out that it was the chicken the night before that was bad, that everybody happened to eat, right? But that gave the government the opportunity to say, see, all these people thought they had AHIs and it turned out to be bad chicken. I have no doubt that type of disinformation or information campaign, misinformation campaign exists in the UAP context as well.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me. And the thing that I think is so maddening about it, if you step back and you look at this from the 50,000 foot field of view, it's as if the government, the Pentagon, the IC, they are literally throwing their employees or former employees under the bus, just like abandoning them. And I mean, how inhumane and how selfish is that? It just blows my mind.
Well, let's focus on that from, again, what could explain the cover-up part. One is act of war. That's really devastating. I mean, sure. If that's the case, right, no one wants to be there. That is not the response we want to have to figure out what to do. but the other issues would be, we can't protect our people. That would be acknowledgement. We cannot protect them. For one thing, even most of these incidents, like I said, have been at homes. What are you going to do? You're going to give every federal government official and their family member detection devices to wear on their body? That's not going to work very well for spies, right? Or at their homes, which they're renting from foreign nationals, maybe from foreign governments that control the territory, as some countries do. It's just not going to work. Think about the massive health costs that go along with all of these injuries, like lifetime damage. Right. Think about how far back, if my evolutionary theory is correct, that we can trace the origins back decades. What about all those people who were based in the embassy in the 1970s, subjected to microwaves, and the US government knew it and never told them? And that's not my view. That was testimony before the US Senate in 1979, where this issue came to light. And they asked, the senators asked the State Department and the other representatives who appeared, how long have we known this has been going on? And the answer was like 10, 15 years. Did you ever tell anyone who was serving? No, we didn't. What's the long-term health effects? We don't know. Not enough time has passed. That was 1979. That's 45 years ago. I'm pretty sure enough time has passed now to determine what happened health-wise to our personnel who were being bombarded by microwaves. So maybe we could see a pattern. The government doesn't want to answer those questions because those answers may very well be bad for it. And it is very much an abandonment. The other aspect of the cover-up, and I saw this firsthand, the concern was that to make it known that we were vulnerable, susceptible to these types of attacks that we can't protect against, would mean who in their right mind would come to serve for the US government and be posted overseas, especially with their family. And I know personally of intelligence officers who had been serving for decades who quit because they weren't going to bring their families to beautiful posts overseas that would have been great for their careers because they were concerned that they couldn't protect their family. There is a huge morale and workforce issue that the government is concerned about from a recruitment standpoint. And most of these, I think these reasons are understandable about why there would be a government cover-up. It doesn't excuse it, and it doesn't go to the point that you were raising of how in the world do you abandon our people and their families when they're serving us all, you know, at low pay, long hours, for little acknowledgement? I mean, at least don't abandon them.
Yeah, it's interesting. The next question I was going to bring up was this. So one source in the intelligence community told me that the State Department actually issued a memo to its employees downplaying AHI or Havana Syndrome because they had an issue staffing overseas assignments. So that the existence of that memo, and I don't have it and I wasn't shown it, that wouldn't surprise you at all.
No. I mean, I know of the memo. There have been multiple messaging like that. It's been coordinated through most of the agencies. CIA sent out one, especially in the wake of 60 Minutes. So did the Department of Defense. And I mean, look, it's an understandable. They were having problems getting people to serve. For the longest time, they weren't telling anybody to even like what to be on the lookout for. You know, you might have heard, and it's been out there sometimes where, you know, what's the instruction to people if you think you're suffering from an AHI attack? Get off the X, because again, it's a beam or it's a bathing. So right. Move to the side. And there's been a lot of testimony from, or, you know, whatever, at least knowledge on my part from victims, but there's been testimony or public airing where people, they didn't know what they were experiencing because, one, they didn't know what an AHI was. So they walked out of the room and whatever was happening to them dissipated, and they kind of walked back into the room and it started up again. And they're like, what the hell is going on? Because obviously whatever it was wasn't reaching from one room to the next, which makes sense.
Now, I want to circle back what we were talking about earlier, my question to you regarding the press. So this may be something that you may or may not be aware of. We've covered it on this show, but a group of Wikipedia editors known as the Guerrilla Skeptics have essentially hijacked anything on Wikipedia and essentially rewritten it. They target anything such as UAPs to anything that really they consider pseudoscience. And this organized group of about 200 Wikipedia editors, they've been doing this since I think it was around 2010. And, and their whole point is they take over the particular Wikipedia page and then they skew it to push a kind of debunking or skeptical point of view. And they've done this on the Havana Syndrome page. And many of these folks that are doing this are part of this nonprofit called the Center for Inquiry. And a member of this organization by the name of Robert Bartholomew wrote this article featured in the magazine Skeptical Inquirer, quote, "The Rise and Fall of Havana Syndrome," where he basically blames Havana on a mass psychogenic illness, a moral panic, and a socially constructed catch-all category, for, an array of pre-existing health conditions. This is also, by the way, the same person that is referenced, whose article that he wrote is referenced in Wikipedia. They've also apparently prevented Dr. David Relman, who, from what I recall, I think he managed the first two studies on this thing. They've also prevented him from posting his research on the Wikipedia page. Now, one of the points that we've been bringing up, because they've targeted particularly the UAP issue, David Grush, Lou Elizondo, and all of these these other folks associated with those particular subjects. But with Wikipedia being, I think, the 7th most trafficked website in the world, and just speaking for myself, I know if I want to go learn about something, I go to Wikipedia. A huge portion of the population will go and look at the Havana Syndrome page on Wikipedia and go, you know what, this is a bunch of baloney. So my question to you as an attorney, does this kind of sort of organized propaganda, and I'll point out as well, they have edited or created something around the lines of around, I think it's like 2,500 to 3,000 Wikipedia pages, and they brag that these pages have had, something like 15 million views. And the lady that actually runs this skeptical group that organizes these Wikipedia editors has stated essentially that they view the Havana Syndrome page as critical to their debunking efforts. Does this run the risk of influencing a potential jury pool in a case that you would try in front of a jury regarding AHI?
Yeah, sure. Look, I teach master's courses at Johns Hopkins University and Texas A&M, and there's a reason why we tell students do not cite to Wikipedia as a source for anything. I agree with you. It is the go-to thing, right? If you want to just learn something really quick, let me just go to Wikipedia and see what's on there. But you got to understand that this is a website that anyone can push information onto it until someone checks it or sources it. And so, yes, it is certainly a problem. Look, I'm not concerned if the general public doesn't believe this, quite frankly. I'm really not, because that's not going to influence anything. I can show to anyone who will reasonably listen that the science exists and that the victims exist. And if I could show what the intelligence is, I can tell you at least the intelligence exists. I'm not going to put my reputation on the line by saying something exists when it doesn't.
Sure.
Now, what is evidence can vary. Again, I was watching some panels I did 31 years ago on the Kennedy assassination that somebody sent me. And I have had this attitude for decades about skepticism of interpretation of evidence. And I hold things to a really high standard. I know internally what the government, not everything, clearly, what the government has done or not done based on least of what I have been able to review inside. These organizations that are attacking it, these individuals who are downplaying AHIs, almost 2-1 from most that I have seen, have no military experience, no intelligence experience. A lot of them don't even have scientific or science background. They're journalists who are writing about this. Some of them are even my clients who I've called out, who they just have differences of opinion about it, but I think they're wrong on it. A cool sounding name of an organization means nothing to me, because years ago I dealt with the Institute for Historical Review. Wow, that sounds like such a great entity that would be modifying Wikipedia pages, would it not? What was it? A group of neo-Nazis, anti-Semites who denied the existence of the Holocaust, that they used that name purposely. They were connected to Liberty Lobby, if you remember that organization. They were connected to, they would use this name to promulgate a very academic, intellectually sounding effort. And in fact, it persuaded some people at times, because people like John Toland, who was a very now late John Toland, very famous author about a historian, wrote a very famous book about Pearl Harbor, among many. He actually, in his later years, went to speak at their convention because he thought it was a legitimate organization, given the name, and nobody looked into it beforehand. Sure. So I'm aware of Robert Bartholomew. I think I have the book that he wrote, if I'm remembering the same guy, this mass psychogenesis type of attitude. It's idiocy. I will say it outright. Go ahead and sue me, Robert. This is an idiotic theory, because so many people independently experienced the same thing. The intel world is incredibly compartmentalized. And the U.S. government was not categorizing and sharing the information when someone in Havana suffered something versus someone in Bogota, in Vienna, in Frankfurt, in Tbilisi, in Tyson's Corner, Virginia. Those folks didn't know of one another, and they would report up their chain of command or into a particular office at the CIA that they had encountered something without even knowing it. I had people through 2021 who had never heard of Havana Syndrome. We used to call it UHI, unidentified health incidents, and then it became AHI. It's sort of like UFO, UAPs, where they keep changing the acronym for it, and I don't know why. But whatever. I go with, and anomalous is, I'm still struggling to how to spell anomalous, and it's sometimes still hard to pronounce. I liked unidentified health incident better, but the reality is it's not unidentified anymore. And it hasn't been for a long time. It's just what's being sold to the public. So I'd love to know who's funding these organizations and these individuals. You know, what agenda do they think they're trying to engage in? Are they just trying to make a name for themselves in doing this? But you can't, and this is a detraction from any of us who want to advocate that this exists. It's also an impediment for those in the government who want to say it doesn't exist. So much of this is classified. It is like the iceberg that sank the Titanic. Only 1/3 or less is above the surface that you can see. It is predominantly beneath the surface. So it's really easy for naysayers to make a comment on, because I will tell you, they probably have 1% of the information that's out there. I probably only have 34% of the information that's out there. But that information contradicts what the U.S. government is saying publicly. That I can say for a fact.
Yeah, I'll speak to you offline about it. But yeah, this nonprofit run out of California, the Guerrilla Skeptics, is run by this lady, Susan Gerbic, and I can tell you members of Congress are aware of this, and they are not happy, because it does influence the public discourse, and the sheer volume of influence that they have on Wikipedia is significant. And when you go and you look up David Grush or Havana, and you're just someone wanting to look into it, you walk away with with incorrect information. And there's even this well-known professional debunker named Mick West, who has stated that Havana is, or I keep saying Havana, it's just what I'm used to hearing, that this particular syndrome is really just like people getting old, tinnitus and all that kind of stuff, where they don't even address the fact that, as you mentioned, children and pets and people not even targeted are getting it. They're reasoning.
I don't even think I know of anybody who's a victim of the dozens that I know personally who are old. Maybe the oldest was early 60s. The vast majority of the victims are in their 20s to 50s.
Wow.
Average age probably in their 30s. And these are the best of the best, which is who Foreign Service officers are, who CIA case officers are. They are at the height or on the upward trajectory of their careers. And some of them are world-class athletes who went from running multiple marathons, Ironman competitions, to having to use a cane and a dog to help them walk and keep balance. This is not what these naysayers are saying, because they don't bother to, first of all, they have no connections or contact with anyone in the actual sphere of what this is. They're just doing this from the outside. I will say, in the aftermath of when Havana Syndrome became public as a syndrome, the Cuban government engaged in a lot of understandable disinformation or information operations to promote it to be what this engagement is of this mass hype, genetic, whatever, mass hysteria, because they wanted to show that it wasn't them. And I get that, because I don't think it was them, and they were being unfairly targeted. And again, why, it stinks that this is called Havana Syndrome. It could be called Vienna Syndrome. I think there were more people that I know of in Vienna hit than in Havana, but it's not called Vienna Syndrome. It wasn't the Austrians' fault either. But some of these people who were making these arguments about Havana Syndrome being fake were just spreading the same disinformation the Cuban government was doing. I understand the Cuban government reason for doing that. I'd like to know what these other individuals' reasons are for doing it.
Yeah, we'll talk about that offline. I've got quite a bit to share on that subject. We've covered it quite a bit on our show. So wrapping it up here, I understand that you have offered to represent clients who are government whistleblowers on the parent government UAP programs. Have any of your AHI victims you've worked with witnessed or been around a UAP event that you can speak of?
Not that I know of.
Got it. Okay. And are you currently representing any UAP whistleblowers?
I am not. So let me tell you a little bit about where the origin of that offer came from, right?
Okay.
I represent federal government whistleblowers, especially in the national security arena. And I've been doing that for decades. My objective with these types of cases, doesn't matter if it's UAP, AHI, any type of misconduct in the U.S. government, is to make sure that national security whistleblowers, those who have had access to classified information, which would be a lot of people within the UAP sphere, right, coming from the Department of Defense, the intelligence community, of what they might have seen or what they've reported or what they know of by way of investigations, is that they can convey that information lawfully to the appropriate oversight authorities, whether that's within the executive branch, like an inspector general's office, or to the Congress, or even to the media in a way that is done properly, right? My client, Carrie, the FBI agent who was in the 60 Minutes broadcast, she is an active serving FBI agent. That was an authorized interview that I arranged with the FBI to make sure that she could tell her story up to a point without any concern of retaliation. So I am more than willing without judging the substance of the information for UAP. I don't have to prove or disprove. I don't have to believe or disbelieve. But by the way, I believe Jodie Foster in Contact at the end of the movie. If there's nothing up there, it's an awful waste of space.
True.
You know, type of attitude.
Right. Yeah.
That is my belief right there. I want to make sure that those who believe they have relevant information within the UAP community, who have classified access, do not take that information, whatever it might be, and unlawfully reveal it, putting themselves in jeopardy by way of their employment or even incarceration by way of prosecution, or jeopardizing the national security interests of the United States. So I want to be able to help them do that lawfully. And then the chips can fall where they may by way of the substance of their belief. So I don't represent anyone specifically, but I certainly have had people reach out to me who are advocating for UAP whistleblowers, and I'm helping guide other lawyers on how to best represent their clients to make sure everything is done the right way.
I love that. And my hat is off to you for supporting that. So finally, how do we move forward without transparency on how the intelligence community has arrived at its conclusions and without access to the full evidence?
So we're forcing the transparency. And my message to the government and those inside the government is be on the right side of history. It will ultimately come out that we are right and they are wrong. And I'm more than willing to believe if you show me evidence to the contrary. But again, from what I've seen so far, I'm not sure how that's going to look because they look at the 60 Minutes broadcast itself about what they were able to show. Russian agents, military intelligence agents, in the same location when an AHI is going on at that time. And we know this unit, and I can tell you that there are intelligence officers inside the U.S. government. And I hate the fact that I have to say, oh, I know that this exists inside, but I can't reveal it to you, to the public. We are revealing it to Congress. We are taking it to the House Intelligence Committee, to the Senate Intelligence Committee, to other committees of jurisdiction. And we are putting our money on the table to show them what our evidence is. And that's why the House Select Committee on Intelligence in December initiated a formal investigation into AHIs. That is why there was a letter sent by a number of senators to the Biden White House just the other day in the aftermath of the 60 Minutes episode, demanding for more information. So this is coming. I'm bringing multiple FOIA lawsuits. I engage in these types of activities and interviews to challenge the official thought, to raise the questions, to get viewers, listeners, watchers, observers to demand of their members of Congress to get answers. And ultimately, this information will be declassified and we will know exactly where things stand. And I just hope, like I said, that our officials will be on the right side of history.
I certainly hope so, too. And, I'll just say that I can tell you with good intelligence that people in the intelligence community, DOD, and other people on Capitol Hill watch this show, in particular our commentary on the UAP issue and how we have been saying for quite some time that the CIA has been, well, we'll just say hiding a few things from Congress illegally. So good chance they'll watch this interview. So, Mark, thank you for joining us.
I'll tell you, as a final thought, it's not just the CIA hiding it from Congress or hiding it from the public. I have a FOIA lawsuit going on right now for classified documents pertaining to AHI. And I know, because the government had to reveal this to us, that they're disseminating the document to multiple agencies for review as part of the declassification process. And we have already gotten word from agencies that some of the other intelligence agencies are now seeing information for the first time that the CIA withheld from them. I'm talking about sister intelligence agencies.
Unbelievable. So essentially, you're saying that there is evidence that the CIA, this thing has been so compartmented that they have hidden this from sister agencies.
Yeah, and that's not new. I mean, I've been representing these guys for 30 years. I used to take things very personal when the CIA acted aggressive to me when I was a younger lawyer, until I would talk to lawyers in the Defense Intelligence Agency, and they would confide in me that they were treated the same way by CIA lawyers. So I realized It had nothing to do with me.
Nothing
this was
personal.
just how they are. Now, that was years ago. I respect the CIA a great deal. I want to make that very clear. I enjoy representing their people. They are great people. I am now older than a lot of the lawyers in these agencies. So I do feel I am respected. They may not like me. They may not like what I do, but we have a mutual respect, and I'm friends with many of them. I don't agree with them on this topic. I will fight them professionally on this topic. But they withhold information from even their own sister agencies all the time. Nothing new there.
Yeah, and it's certainly the case with the UAP issue, in particular what the Office of Global Access has been up to on that topic. Yeah, exactly. All right, Mark, well, thank you for joining us. How can the folks watching us at home support the victims of AHI, sort of keep up with the news, obviously not looking at Wikipedia, and with your further developments on this topic?
Well, probably the best way would be just to follow me on Twitter at Mark S. Zaid, Zaid ESQ. So at Mark S. Zaid ESQ, because that's where I'm posting. Like my website, you can go to my law firm website. I don't think I posted anything there for 4 or 5 years. It's totally out of date because I don't care. That's not where I get my clients from within the intelligence community. So it's just there. So I would say that. But supporting people, look, this is a very niche environment as far as who's being impacted, right? We're not talking about tens of thousands of people who are suddenly developing cancer because there's some bad substance in a food that we all routinely eat, so that everybody becomes cognizant of it and Congress gets engaged with it. This is a select group of people, in the hundreds, maybe in the low thousands or so, that are impacted. So spread along, all over the country. So I might not have a member of Congress or a victim from Nebraska. That doesn't mean the senators from Nebraska or the members of Congress shouldn't take an interest in this. So, if you live in any particular state and you want to be helpful on this, you can write to your member of Congress or call them and encourage them to help look into this and demand accountability. That would be really helpful.
Mark, thank you so much for joining us, and moreover, just thank you for fighting the good fight. There's nothing more maddening when you see the government throw, essentially, their veterans, the people that have served their country to protect us and protect our freedom. To see them thrown under the bus like this is just unacceptable. So, Mark, thank you for joining us, and we look forward to having you back on, hopefully soon.
Thank you, Matthew. Really appreciate it.
Truly mind-blowing. I think if you listen to every word Mark Zaid said in the interview, clearly this is going on. Havana Syndrome is going on. People are being injured by it. He lays bare the fact that the professional debunkers of the world, the ones that make their living off of debunking, be it writing books or writing for Twitter or journalists writing debunking articles, clearly have no idea. They have no clue about what they are talking about. This professional debunker, Robert Bartholomew out of New Zealand, that throws all of this hogwash about this being a mass psychogenic illness, is simply magical thinking on his part. He does not know what he is talking about. It's not based on science or reason. It's none of these folks, these debunkers, these professional debunkers. They don't hold a security clearance. None have interviewed Havana Syndrome victims. And as Mark Zaid said, these folks literally know 1% of what is going on. And frankly, if you ask me, that is being quite generous. Congress. But I think the smoking gun here is the memo Mark Zaid received from the National Security Agency regarding one of his clients. This memo reads, dated October 16th, 2014, well before anyone knew of Havana Syndrome, quote, "The National Security Agency confirms that there is intelligence information from 2012 associating the hostile country to which Mr. Beck traveled in the late 1990s with a high-powered microwave system weapon that may have the ability to weaken, intimidate, or kill an enemy over time and without leaving evidence. The 2012 intelligence information indicated that this weapon is designed to bathe the target's living quarters in microwaves, causing numerous physical effects, including a damaged nervous system. The National Security Agency has no evidence that such a weapon, if it existed, and if it was associated with the hostile country in the late 1990s, was or was not used against Mr. Beck." Wow. Okay, so clearly they are doing some legal posturing at the end, but the gist of it is describing detailed intelligence pointing to the existence of such a microwave weapon. The important fact to note here is that this memo came years before Havana was ever on anyone's radar. So this professional debunker, Robert Bartholomew, is simply wrong. At the end of the day, America deserves better. Our men and women who serve our country, protecting our freedoms, deserve better. A government that throws members of its national security establishment under the bus and a CIA that lies to Congress and its citizens is not a democracy. It is a shame.